Hey, family, what's up? This is Doug Reed with the Let's Go Show. Once again, I'm super excited. I have a very special guest that I've actually encountered. Just to give you a little backdrop, I saw Victor, let's say first in Philadelphia at the SOSE event, the summit 2 years ago. Then I got an opportunity to actually, real talk, just share the stage with him. He was on another platform, but you're definitely going to be impressed with this interview as we get into it. He is the director of Soul Shop for Black Churches, and we're going to get into that. So first, I'll say, hey, Victor, how you doing?
I'm good, brother. I appreciate you having me on your show today.
Yeah, it's always an honor, especially when I come across people. I'll just say of your magnitude, and we're just going to jump right in it. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am a product of rural North Carolina. Born and raised in a little town called Plymouth, North Carolina. Population roughly 4,000 people. Very small rural town. I grew up the son of a pastor. My father was a Church of Christ pastor. Most of my life, most of my childhood, he pastored two churches, because back then, especially in rural communities, you had church on either first and third Sunday or second and fourth Sunday. And part of that was because a lot of pastors pastored more than one church, and because they wanted people to be able to fellowship with different churches. So my father for years pastored two churches, and so we would attend church every Sunday. I was in church on Wednesdays, some Fridays. So I grew up really being bred in the church. And so when I graduated from high school with North Carolina Central University, HBCU in North Carolina, graduated with a degree in business management. At that time, I wanted to be a banker, because again, growing up in the rural North Carolina, I didn't see a whole lot of different things especially for Black men to do. And so, a lot of the way that I framed what I wanted to do, I learned from watching television. I knew I
Uh,
wanted to go to work clean and come home clean.
yeah, yeah.
I,
And
the shows, the
if
shows
I
I watched growing up, they came home at the end of the day, you know, kissed the wife and had a suit and tie on. I said, okay, that's me right there.
hey, let me stop you. So first, let me just and I think I told you, I did tell you. I think it was the first summit in Philadelphia. Of course, dressed very well. But for me, it was the socks.
Yeah.
And I say it because Victor's sock game. If you don't know anything about, the different types of socks that people wear with the suits, just to highlight, the suit and the shoes. Well dressed brother, and
I
and
appreciate
it,
that.
and it too, Vic. I want to kind of backdrop real quick
Well,
because
look, let me tell you this real quick, just because since you brought up the socks. My wife, whenever she wants to put me in my place, she
mm,
says, everything is not about you and your socks.
oh, hey, but matter of fact, let me throw this nugget out. And we talking about business. You got a line
Yeah,
socks. I mean,
yeah,
let's put it. Let's speak it into existence. That's a business.
yeah.
You just put that out based on just socks. But
Yeah,
one thing I wanted to kind of go, and we'll talk about the mental health aspect.
yeah.
But one thing that is very important to me, even in this journey around mental health, is having a spiritual foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for us, we believe in Jesus Christ, but how important is a spiritual foundation to you?
Yeah. Wow, man. That's a good question. I think for me, it's important on a lot of different levels. For one, um, the things that I needed to learn, and I say this a lot when I share and do presentations on equity. A lot of the life lessons about how we should treat people I learned from growing up in the church. And I tell people all the time, like I'll get questions from audiences and usually from my white brothers and sisters about, how do I become a better ally to Black people? Or how can I help in discrimination? And I tell them, everything you need to know, if you grew up in the church, everything you need to know is right there. Because, I grew up hearing, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your neighbor as yourself. But somewhere along the line, we kind of interjected do unto others as you will have them to do unto you, except for those people, because they're different. So you better do unto them before they do unto you. Love your neighbor as yourself, except for those people, because they're different from you. And if we go back to those foundational lessons, that's a lot of how I mirror what, how I navigate how I treat people, because I go back to those basic lessons of, is this how I want somebody to treat me? Is this the way that I express love to someone else? And so that foundation was very important to me for that reason. The other thing, though, is, even when in the work I do now, in suicide prevention and awareness, what I find is that the thing that people who experience suicidal thoughts are generally missing one of two things: hope or connectivity. And for me, that foundation, that spiritual foundation, has always been a source of hope, and it's been a source of connection, because even when I feel like, and I've had some low points in my life when I felt like I can't find anybody who understands, I can't find anybody who I can share this with, but I always have that faith connection. I always have the connection with God, that I always feel like there's hope, because there's a power greater than me that's got control over everything that concerns me. And I remind myself in the darkest times, God has the final say in everything that concerns me. So that spiritual foundation has always been important. And I think for us, especially as Black men, when we see all the negative images and all the negative messages about who we are, being able to say, that's who you say I am, but God says I'm somebody different. That has always been something that has helped and sustained me, even when the church failed me, even when I couldn't find that connection to the physical church. There was always that spiritual connection, that relationship with God that would bring me through. And so that's always been a source of hope and connection for me.
You said something too, and I want to highlight that. You said a relationship with God.
Yeah.
Not religious. We're talking about
Right.
a relationship.
Absolutely.
What is that? How is that relate? How would you define a relationship with God?
But one, I think we have, even for me growing up, we always had this picture of God as being, this entity that sits on high with a hammer to crack you on the head when you do something wrong. But that's not who God is. The relationship for me is one where God doesn't judge me. God reassures me. God doesn't knock me down for doing wrong. God lifts me up. Even when I'm in my wrong, God lifts me up and says, okay, I got you. You need to get yourself out of this, but I got you. And that relationship with him is what, it helps me to be able to even look at myself and say, I have this, like a lot of folks, what would Jesus do? But relationship, it becomes something even beyond that, that moniker, or that or what can become a catchphrase. It does become, I don't want to disappoint, God. God has invested too much in me. I don't want to disappoint him. And when I'm hurting, I can tell him exactly what I'm feeling. Even when I can't share something with my wife, because I'm like, I'm not sure she's ready for this yet. But I can share it with God and say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm going through. Even when, there are times for me when, and I know this, for a lot of folks, when you start talking about mental health and religion, there's so many nuances to that. But for me, even when I start to feel like, I could, maybe I could spiral into depression or anxiety, there's always that peace that comes from somebody else has got me. I don't have to go through this alone. And I have to remind myself every now and then, I'll have to go through this alone. And sometimes for me, it's just a matter of, I don't have to get down on my knees and pray. I can just say, God, I'm glad you're here. I just appreciate you being with me. And I'll tell you, I went through something just recently. And I was actually standing at my kitchen sink. And for some reason I was like, I was really like discouraged. I was feeling down. And there was an old song like from the 70s that was kind of playing in my head. And I was thinking, well, those were the good old days back then when, when you didn't have any burdens, any worries. And I'm telling you, I felt this I won't say I heard the voice of God, but I felt the voice of God say, today is pretty good too, isn't it? And
Mm.
that just changed. I mean, I just shifted right out of that funk because I was like, yeah, it is good because you got me.
Yeah.
And that's what that relationship means to me.
You know what? It's funny, and I expressed to you today, and I told you I really wanted to do this interview. Went to my best friend's funeral today,
Mm.
and it left me numb, and actually, to be honest, kind of mad at God.
Mm.
But there was a point in the service, um, just feeling numb. I hear everything being said. And of course, the way we praise in the Black church takes it
Mhm.
another level.
Yeah.
And the song, can't remember the artist, and it was saying, I'm surrounded by you.
Yeah, I know that song.
And, and big shout out to the church family in doing that, because that's what I needed to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the reassurance of how good God is. Like,
Yeah.
no matter what, I'm always surrounded by you.
Yeah.
And that, and go ahead.
I say, the interesting thing for me too, in as we talk about relationship, that's been one of the things too that has really fueled a lot of the work I do now, recognizing through that relationship with him that we also, particularly in the Black church, we have failed people miserably as it pertains to mental health and suicide. My father pastored for 48 years. He just retired from pastoring about 6 years ago. And in all the time I was growing up, I never one time heard my father or any of his peers talk about mental health from the pulpit. And if even outside the pulpit, if I heard anything about suicide, it was, very negative connotations, like, well, you're going to hell if you die by suicide. And, and also hearing that message, basically telling me that as a Black person, we don't have the right to be depressed or anxious. We survived slavery. We're a resilient people. And so the church kind of reinforced, in a lot of ways, some of the stigma and stereotypes around mental health, people living with mental health challenges. And, through that relationship with him, I feel like he's allowed me to see things very differently, and to understand that um, people are going to experience desperation. People are going to experience suffering. And when we tell them they don't have a right to suffer because you just need to pray harder, you just need to be a better Christian, we do people a disservice. And not only have we not helped people in their desperation by giving them that message, but people have looked at the church as, when we're supposed to be an oasis and a sanctuary, people look at the church as something that is condemning them and something that is compelling them to move in a different direction and not come to the church. And so part of that, I think, that relationship, and thinking back to growing up, how I had this physical presence in the church, but because God was always portrayed to me as this big judge sitting on high, I didn't have relationship with him.
Mm.
As I've come to have that relationship with him and think of him more as my friend, my mentor, my sponsor, all the things that we look for in people, as I began to see those things in God, and then I also began to realize that, God, I had this wrong growing up. My world growing up was very narrow. It
Mm-hmm.
was, I had certain thoughts about, I'll tell you this as an example. I was raised to be homophobic. I was told all my life, or all through my childhood, that people who were gay and lesbian, they were dirty, they were going to hell. And I mean, I almost had a hatred for them.
Wow.
It wasn't until I got away from that kind of foundational teaching in my childhood church, went off to college and started experiencing the joy of knowing people who are different from me and recognizing that they are children of God just like I am. that I evolved from a place of, homophobia to a place of tolerance to now a place where, I will march in the pride parade, lock arms with my gay brothers and sisters because of their humanity. Doesn't
Mm,
mean I approve or disapprove of who they love, but I have taken on a mentality of live and let live, love and let love. Who they go home with at the end of the day, got nothing to do with me. That's none of my business. And for a lot of Christians, this is the thing that you know always kind of annoys me is that for a lot of Christians, number one, we'll overlook a whole lot of other things, but that's the one, the one sin that will zero in on. But the other thing is, I ask folks all the time, why are you so fixated on who that person's sleeping with? What does that got to do with you?
mm.
And when you think about the fact that um, people who identify as LGBTQ are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide and 5 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. And when you look at, even the most recent data that came out from the CDC, and you look at how children who identify as gay or lesbian are much more likely to die by suicide, much more likely to experience depression, much more likely to experience anxiety. And they can't turn to the church because the church has told them you are a sinner, and until you get that cleaned up, we don't want anything else to do with you. Then we have left them to figure this thing out for themselves. And so a lot of my evolution and my growing relationship with God has really helped me to be a much better person and to treat my brothers and sisters much better.
Let me ask you this, because I know kind of fast forward a little bit because I know you have a passion around suicide prevention. What led you in being an advocate around suicide prevention?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of things in my life have really come through a process of evolution because my philosophy for things has always been, it's not always about what you know, it's about what you understand. And as I have evolved, I've come to understand things differently. And when you understand things differently, then you move differently, then you flow differently. And so one of the things I think that was a catalyst for me initially was that I worked for several years for a hospital system. And I was approached by a couple of folks about doing some things around volunteer work around the suicide space. But the one thing that stuck with me was, as a hospital system, my number one priority should be to prevent avoidable deaths. And the more I started working in suicide space, the more I realized that suicides are preventable. Often suicides are preventable, and if we do nothing or we think we can't do anything, then nothing's going to change. And so I began to kind of operationally move in that space now to talking about, okay, how do we reduce suicides in our hospital? But the more I understood and the more I interacted with people who were suicide loss survivors, the more I talked to people who had experienced suicidal thoughts, people who had attempted suicide, and had conversations with them, and just really felt that compassion for them and recognizing that they had lost hope and they had lost connection. And oftentimes it was because of things that people that they loved either said or didn't say. And so it just really became more of a passion for me. And it actually, today, I will tell you about it, that's my ministry. My
Yeah.
ministry is in helping people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, people experiencing anxiety and depression, and really helping them to find that hope and connection.
Yeah, that's definitely your ministry. And I know every day that you post something around it. And I remember seeing a post, and I had to study. Well, I'll say what it was. I seen a post, and it was hashtag be here tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow. But then when I researched it, I don't know, can't remember the gentleman's name. And I think we evolved around him,
Kevin Hines.
around the
Yep.
suicide attempt on the
Yep.
Golden State Bridge.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
those words, and I was just kind of visualizing, like, one thing that I've learned in talking with people that have attempted suicide was they wanted the pain to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I saw that post, I was like, be here tomorrow. And I think I even did something just because I felt it that way. And I was like, well, wow, if I can tell somebody,
Yeah.
we just want you to be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let me ask you this, because I know you do those social media posts every day, Instagram,
Mhm.
Facebook, LinkedIn, all across the social media streams. How how much of a response do you get?
Yeah.
And then in those responses, if you could think about one that really touched your heart that you could share because somebody else saw your post
Yeah.
about being here tomorrow.
Yeah. It's amazing the response that I get. There's hardly a day that goes by that somebody doesn't DM me and say either something that you posted helped me when I was in a bad spot, or you have no idea what you're doing, to change people's lives. And that just means the world to me because my whole motivation for doing it is really to put some good out there in the world, and to encourage people who may be experiencing that suicidal desperation. So yeah, it really means a great deal. Then the second part of your question was what?
Well, if you could recall a response
Oh
that
yeah,
really,
yeah, yeah. You know what? One of the things that has been, and I share this sometimes when I'm doing presentations, but one of the things that has I probably resonated with me the most over the years has been, um, and I'll share one in particular, but family members who have come to me, either family members, people I grew up with in high school, went through school with, will reach out to me and say, "Hey, can you talk to me? My
mm,
child is going through this, or I'm going through this. I can't talk to anybody else, but I know that you are in this space. I see the things that you post. I feel like you understand." I had a family member to reach out to me a while back. This was pre-COVID, so it's probably been 3-4 years ago, but a family member reached out to me and shared with me that he had attempted suicide 3 times, and had never talked to anybody. And my father, who is a retired pastor, has always kind of been sort of the patriarch of it. And I got a large extended family. My father's one of 18 kids, so we got a large
wow.
extended family. But my father's really kind of been the patriarch for the family for a while. And I even asked this person, "Did you talk to my dad about it?" He said he wouldn't understand. He wouldn't
Mm,
understand, but you understand. And he said, I'm in a bad place right now, and I need help. And I was able to talk to him, and I was able to get him in a place to get him some help. And I've had a couple of those kind of situations where I have somebody reach out to me and say, "Hey, my daughter and my son is really going through a bad time right now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," because they're ashamed, they're embarrassed about it. And I can talk to them and say, "You know what? You don't have anything to be ashamed of. If your son or your daughter was, dealing with cancer, you wouldn't be ashamed. You'd be trying to get them help." And so it's really those kind of things, I think, because if there are people in my family, people in my circle that feel like I'm the only one they can reach out to talk about this, because I have basically put this signal out there that says, "Hey,
mm-hmm,
I'm safe for you to talk to about this."
mm,
Um, and if they can come to me, can humble themselves and come to me and do that, then how many more people out there are being touched and being encouraged by what I'm putting out? And I would tell you, I have not missed a day of posting, um, probably over 5 years now.
yeah,
Uh, every day, I don't
every
care where
day.
I am, I'm gonna post. I don't care if it's Christmas. I don't care if I'm on vacation. I'm always gonna do that because you never know when somebody needs to hear it.
Yeah,
So I try to put something out every day.
and and I'll say this because we were kind of talking earlier, and the social media posts we want you to understand is not for likes
Right.
because there's a lot of negative voices out here, and even while
Yeah.
we're doing this podcast, and
Yeah.
Victor he'll
Yeah.
tell you about the podcast he's doing, then he's telling you the positive ways that he's using social media to impact your life. And I want to take a little commercial break. Not in a commercial break. I'm not going to say a commercial break. I want to take a time for information. Vicky, if you could just tell somebody that's listening or they will see this, uh, a helpline or ways they can contact if they're having some issues around suicide or depression.
Yeah, I always tell people if you are first of all, if you're experiencing mental health challenges, I encourage everyone get help. If you or someone you know are experiencing a crisis, dial 988. You can dial or you can text 988 to be connected to a trained counselor who can connect you with the help, the services, and support that you need. And I just want anybody out there listening to also understand that you're not broken, you're not flawed. If you need help, there's no shame, there's no weakness in reaching out for help, especially to my brothers, to Black men in particular. There is no shame in acknowledging that you need help. Real strength is in admitting I can't do this alone.
Yeah, that's great. And that's, we want you here tomorrow. So,
Absolutely.
like, I'm gonna kind of fast forward a little bit. Tell us, what are you working on now?
Yeah. Well, let me say first, man, I have been blessed. I've been blessed in my life career wise. I was a vice president for a large hospital system for several years. I've been mental health commissioner here in the state of North Carolina. I was the state's first chief health equity officer. And I'm at a place now where I can kind of do the things that I love doing, the things that I'm passionate about. So one of the things right now, one of the biggest things is being the national director for Soul Shop for Black Churches. And what Soul Shop for Black Churches is a 1 day workshop, an 8 hour workshop that teaches faith leaders how to talk about suicide and mental health challenges to their congregants. As I talked about earlier,
Let me stop you real quick, Vic. Can you? And I told you how to do this. Can you say that again a little slower because I really, really need people to understand
yeah,
and catch on to what you just said.
yeah, it is a workshop that teaches faith leaders how to talk about suicide and suicidal desperation and mental health challenges to their congregants. Because one of the things that we have done, especially in the Black church, is we have done a real disservice to people who may be experiencing anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, because we have denied people the right to hurt. We tell them if you were a better Christian, you would be going through. You just need to pray harder. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One is that, and this is one of the things I found is that for a lot of pastors, and I love pastors, my father was a pastor, but for a lot of pastors, there are a lot of pastors who haven't dealt with their own trauma. And if you haven't dealt with your own trauma, it's hard for you to help somebody else deal with their trauma. So for a lot of pastors, they're telling you what they keep telling themselves. If you just pray harder, if you just, get closer to God, you're going to be okay, because that's how they keep pushing forward. And there's data out there on the mental health struggles that pastors go through because of those challenges, and because of not oftentimes not allowing themselves the room to be vulnerable. Um, so that's a lot of what motivates me to do this work. But again, I think one of the challenges is pastors not deal with their own trauma. The other thing is that it's difficult oftentimes for faith leaders to be able to marry mental health and mental health diagnoses with their theology, because they've always kind of been opposed to one another. If you talk about suicide, the only way you ever heard about suicide was if you die by suicide, you're going to hell. If we talk about being depressed, what you hear is you got no reason to be depressed. You ought to just shout hallelujah and just move on with it. One of the things I will tell you though, and when you brought up my friend Kevin Hines, there's something that he shares that I think puts some of that into perspective too. And I share this oftentimes when I'm talking with faith leaders. Is he shares that when he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, there's two things about his story that have always resonated with me. One is that when he was there on the bridge, there was a lady who approached him, and he thought to himself, this is my chance. This lady is going to rescue me. She's going to ask me how I'm doing. She's going to rescue me. And the lady walked up to him with the camera and said, would you take my picture? didn't notice that he was broken, that he had tears in his eyes. And he felt like, okay, well, that must mean I'm just supposed to do this, because otherwise, she would have said something. The other thing, though, is that he says when he jumped off the bridge, the minute he let go of that bridge, he realized, I don't want to die. I do not want to die. He began to pray and ask God, just please help me. The way that we do, when we find ourselves in a bad situation. But I always share with pastors who say, if you die by suicide, you're going to hell. First of all, you don't know what happened between the time that person either made that decision to die by suicide or even did the act that led to their suicide and the time that they stopped breathing. You don't know what kind of conversation they had with God. You know what kind of relationship they had with God. So to say that is really you're speaking out of ignorance. And so I always try to tell faith leaders, and it goes back to that whole be here tomorrow, regardless what you think about that person. And they really sometimes struggle when I have conversations about, the suicide rates for the LGBTQ community. But regardless of what you think about that person, you can't help them if they're not here. And so your first priority as a faith leader needs to be, how do I make sure this person is going to be here tomorrow? Because if they're not, they can't repent. They can't, none of that. The other thing is that what faith leaders oftentimes don't realize is that you got people sitting in your congregation who are also worried about people in their families who are experiencing depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, but they can't come to you because you're going to tell them what they already know, but they just need to pray harder. They just need a better relationship with Jesus. So you got people sitting there who are either worried about somebody else who they think is suicidal. You got people sitting there who may be suicidal themselves and can't come out and say it. You got people who are former suicide attempt survivors themselves, and they can't give their testimony to say, I was here, but now I'm set free, I'm delivered, and not only did I pray, but I went to the psychiatrist, I took my medication, and look what God has done. They can't give that testimony because we don't allow that kind of conversation. And then the fourth category is you've got people sitting there who have I'm about to lose myself now. You got people who are either worried about somebody else, they're suicidal themselves right now. They have experienced attempted suicide in the past. And there's one more I'm forgetting right now, but
a lot of it is just like you were just saying. It's the judgmental process.
Yeah, it is. And
people sitting in those, sitting in a congregation. Let's say if they get knowledge that hey, somebody attempted suicide or whatever, and they prayed away, but it's the judgment. It's the we're better than because you didn't pray it away. So that judgment and people cast judgment, especially in the church, all the time.
The fourth one was they've lost somebody to suicide. They've had people that they have lost to suicide, and they have to grieve alone. They have to grieve in silence because they can't come to the church and say, if I lost my wife in a car accident and I came to the church would they bring potato salad, chicken, they wrap their arms around me. If my wife dies by suicide, they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, so they don't come around. And then I have to deal with it by myself and have to suffer in silence. And if the church is supposed to be a place of healing, if it's a house of healing, it's not just healing from physical pain. It's also a house of healing for emotional, mental, psychological pain.
So let me ask you. I mean, now doing great work, actually with the Soul Shop for Black churches. Based on even your experience, your lived experience, your education, what is the ideal picture for Vic going forward? Like what do you visualize, or what would you like to see?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I have a mantra I live by, and it is look where you've been, consider where you are, but know where you're going. And, as I look, like right now, I'm in a space where I'm doing a lot of public speaking. So, I get to travel. I got to travel to Portland next week. I got to travel to LA in a couple of weeks. And so a lot of where I am now and where I, see myself in the future is really being able to take this what I call my ministry, and do the things that I'm passionate about, which for me, a lot of it, and again, kind of going back to my upbringing, my childhood, it is about how do I create space in the faith community to have these kind of conversations? And how do I help us to create what we call soul safe communities, where it's okay that people see this church and say, that's a place I can go to, and I can be open and honest about what I'm feeling. They're not going to judge me. They're going to support me. They're going to help me. And then also to be able to equip the faith community to be able to recognize when this is not something that I can handle. This is something I need to refer to a professional. So that's a big piece of where I am right now. And then the other part of it is I do a lot of work in the equity space and talking about how we create more access to mental health resources in Black and Brown communities. And even with the Soul Shop piece, I categorize Soul Shop as really about creating access. We don't have a lot of community resources in Black and Brown communities as it pertains to mental health. And we are statistically, Black people are more likely to go to a preacher than they are to go to a psychiatrist. But if I can somehow create space in the faith-based community to where that church, that synagogue, that faith-based space can be a place where people can go and talk about their mental health challenges, mental health struggles, and know they're going to be connected to help, then I feel like I have done what God put me here on earth to do.
Wow. You confirmed some stuff with me. We had a conversation earlier, and I tell you the road that I'm looking at, and just being free to impact, I'll say it like this, to impact the masses.
Yeah.
So even before we get into what I call the Let's Go Challenge, please let us know, how do we follow you, or where to follow you?
Yes, I am on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. You can find me at one of two Vics, the number one OF, number two VICS. And the reason it's one of two Vics, I have a son, Victor Jr. He's number two of two Vics. I'm number one of two Vics. But you can find me on one of two Vics, and like you said, I'm posting every day. You can Google me and find my name too. You if you Google Victor Armstrong, you're probably gonna come up. There's a stunt man that's gonna come up first. I'm gonna come up number two.
Yeah, but we're not pulling stunts. We're saving
Yeah,
souls. But so, I mean, definitely follow Vic across all social media streams, one or two Vics, Victor Armstrong. And I told Vic, one thing before we close out the Let's Go show is the Let's Go Challenge. I'll say one word. Vic has the opportunity to say one word, whatever words that come to mind, and just repeat back to me. So, are you ready, Vic?
I'm ready.
And we'll start with your passion. Suicide.
Preventable.
Life.
Live it.
Value.
People.
Fatherhood.
Love it. Love it.
Success.
Personal.
Mental health.
Health.
Crisis.
Oh. I know I'm not supposed to hesitate.
No, you do whatever you wish.
Yeah. And I tell you why I hesitate, because I think what we call crisis oftentimes, it's not the person that's in crisis, it's the system that's in crisis. When you have a physical pain and you go to urgent care, they patch you up, they can give you a prescription and go on your way. It's routine. When a person experiences a mental health crisis, the system is broken. We don't have the resources, so it's the system that's in crisis. So I guess, my word for crisis would be system.
I love it. Well-being.
Peace.
Education.
Every day.
I believe in the teachable moment. Role model.
Jesus.
Wow, Big, you dropped a lot of gems. So that actually completes the Let's Go challenge. You have been so inspirational. I appreciate you, brother, for coming on to the Let's Go show. As far as your knowledge, your background, and how you continue to influence the masses, not only as a person, but I take this personal as a Black man. It's very instrumental for me, and I pray that it's very instrumental for others that are listening. So with that, any last words, Vic?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me on the show because you don't know how much you inspire me. I see the work that you do. I see the passion that you have for the work that you do, and I see what you pour into Black men. And so that, that moves me. And the thing I will say too is that I think, and I will close with this. I think for Black men, we just got to get comfortable being vulnerable. Just be willing to be vulnerable, to say I'm hurting, to say I need a hug, to say, this is more than I can handle, to say I'm tired of being tired. There's things that happen every day that you could get angry about. But don't just get angry. Get motivated to do something, to put some good into the world, and to change the world.
I say thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Let's Go show with Doug Reed featuring Victor Armstrong. And you know what I say? Let's go, baby. Peace. I'm out.